Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Auckland Unitarian Church this bright morning. Welcome to those of you who are in the building here, including one or two visitors. Nice to see you.
Though some of us have things to celebrate today, others have pain and grief. Some of our members have serious illness, poverty, troubles in our families, responsibility that overwhelm us at times. But let this candle be a sign that we are together in all this mess. Not only us, but the whole human race that we share our life with. We all belong together. And I invite you to join in the words of the covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each other. Now, for the sermon I was originally planning, it would have required a reading which was from the prophet Isaiah about people laying down their weapons. That went with, I'm going to give you a short version of this, even though I wouldn't want to put you through the long version. The Russian invasion of, my mind's gone blank, of Ukraine is escalating this week, and there's now a suggestion the Ukrainians are trying to get more tanks being supplied from Europe. And Russia has warned that this will be seen as an escalation, but it's a scary scene and reminded me of an incredibly thought-provoking movie I saw many years ago called The 25th Hour. In that story, it is about World War II from the eyes of a Romanian peasant. And it is absolutely horrific and at times even funny. And I could not actually get myself to provide a brief summary of it, but I'll give you a very brief summary. But he ends up being thrown into a concentration camp because the local police chief wants to have an affair with his wife. He gets freed he gets accused of being a Jew, and that's why he's supposed to be in the camp. He was not a Jew. He ended up being rescued by the Jews and ended up in turn being interned by mistake to about 6 concentration camps. And that's the real horror of the story. We think of Hitler and his concentration camps as the worst. The Russians were coming a close second. There were other countries who got undesirables and sent them to the Germans to put in their camps, sent them to the Russians. It was an appalling story. And I just couldn't, and yet there was humor, and I couldn't get myself to tell this story. I tried for about a day or two. And so it's still a theme. It's still on my mind that the war in Russia, in Ukraine, could be another chapter of what was going on in the Second World War.
Well, when I realised I would not speak on that subject without getting into deep trouble, I cast my mind about thinking, what else on earth can I talk about? And I spent several days looking at the Christian lectionary, and every text that they had was dead boring. And then suddenly my bacon was saved by Jacinda Ardern deciding to resign from the being Prime Minister. And suddenly I thought, how can I talk about anything else? On the other hand, once I decided that was my subject, I had to think, well, how can I say something you haven't heard already? If you've been watching the newspapers, you'll have had a fair idea of it. But there was one point of view you have not yet heard, and that is we haven't heard what each other think. We are members of a group that care about world affairs and national affairs. I would be very much interested to hear what you have to say on this subject, and my job then becomes much easier because I am just going to open up and say these are issues that have been raised. What do you think? And when I got onto that frame of mind, I had actually no trouble whatever. I went through all the papers I could find and overseas papers and came up with a list of concerns, and there was some that really stood out. The first one that stood out for me was in yesterday's Weekend Herald. It had an editorial that was entitled "The Crucifixion of Jacinda Ardern." Now, did any of you read that? I think it's one of the best editorials I've read. And it really was horrific. The things, the bullying that it said Jacinda went through over the last year or two. And without saying in so many words, it appears to be that is the reason why she resigned, that she could not handle the negative flack that kept coming her way. And the article said it's ironic that Jacinda, who was the one who first recognised or first made a big issue of the harm done by social media in blowing up evil for the Muslims in New Zealand, was now a victim of the same wars herself. And the article did not actually name those it's believed responsible, but it's the worst sections of the media and the worst sections of New Zealand who picked up the negative mood that you can so easily switch on with social media. There's some very positive words also in this editorial. The main accusation is a quote from Helen Clark. She wrote, "The pressures on prime ministers are always great, but in this area of social media, clickbait and 24/7 media cycles, Jacinda has faced a level of vitriol which in my experience is unprecedented in this country." So Helen Clark has given us food for thought. And some of us have become negative. I remember a media discussion that I was having on my Facebook page, and I said, this government is just not listening to the people in another context altogether. And a member of my family said, yes, let's get rid of them. And she got stuck into Jacinda. And I was horrified that I had actually started this unfair attack just by, I disagreed with one thing that Jacinda had done. This other person was throwing bricks at her. And I was shocked, and I would say, yes, it's true that this is a fact. I believe it is. After Jacinda started off her leadership 5 years ago, she had a period of charismatic leadership when it seemed she could hardly do anything wrong over the Christchurch mosque attacks, over COVID, over the White Iron volcano. And there was a time when that suddenly changed. Well, it didn't suddenly change, it gradually changed. I think when it really became nasty was when we had that group barricading Parliament. And here there was not only a hatred of the government, but a hatred of almost anybody. It was a very unpleasant side of New Zealand life. A section of the public has got tired of her, and I think the other main cause has been the fact that while Labour's first moves to contain COVID were very popular and very effective, later on it became much more controversial. People were just getting sick of COVID. People were getting sick of support for other groups that not for them, and that was the move that led to Jacinda saying she did not have enough fuel in the tank to fight another election. But I must admit, I hadn't appreciated just how big a part these attacks had played until I read that article in the Herald yesterday. The article also quotes Sam Neill in saying the attacks on Ardern are getting into a disgraceful and embarrassing pile on by bullies, misogynists, and the aggrieved. And gender stereotyping became a very ugly part of this whole episode. So my sympathies are totally with Jacinda in her resigning. She is a politician. I must admit, I never became a total fan of her. I would not rate her 10 out of 10. Several of her policies seem rigid to me. Sometimes she seemed to be manipulating the news. But I agree that history will rate her as one of the best prime ministers New Zealand has had. And so for her, when she's leaving, it should not be seen as a sign of failure, but a sign of a job well done, and the baton effectively passed to members of her party. They will probably remain on the same track. So I don't think it's going to look like a loss. I think she will come out of it looking like a great politician. But the second question that leads to, I'd appreciate your opinion on that, was there's vitriol against Jacinda, the reason that she left. The second question I'd raise is to me, and probably everybody in one way or another, what policies will you be looking for in this next election? Now, in effect, we've got the first shot in our election campaign fired already. What would you like to see from your party or from other parties? What policies will you support? And I had no trouble finding my own selection, and I'm sure you won't be confining your discussion to them. At the top of my list would be action against global warming. I've taken, I think, 2 or 3 talks about that already over the last year, and I would just say what my list of things are that I myself am trying to work as hard as I can for global warming. Just in the last week, I added 2 things to my campaign. I bought a new low fuel car, and I bought another low carbon diet that I never tasted before and will now be cooking once a week. Also on my policy list, one comes from Jacinda. Her strategy of being kind to one's opposition and to people you disagree with. I think that was a marvellous lead, and I hope the any new government, both maiden parties and the minor parties, I hope they will learn that lesson. A third thing is not so obvious, but when you think about it, I think it's time we looked at capital gains tax. When Labor first got into power, one of my favourite policies was capital gains tax. I thought it was fair. I thought it would help to stop inflation. And then Jacinda, I thought was the biggest mistake she ever made was to promise never to do it again. It made sense when she had to keep Winston Peters happy to say now is not the time to do this, but to say it would never happen so long as she is in the head of the Labor Party, was I think a very bad move. But it raises the obvious question: why not do it now? So I know there are arguments against it. Some people said the main purpose of doing it was to bring down house prices, and house prices are already coming down without its help. But I think there are still other reasons for having capital gains tax. It's fairer. Capital gains taxes help capital gains help rich people and hurt poor people. Anyway, that's gone on a bit too long on that one. The poverty gap is too wide. Services such as the health system are seriously short of staff. And issues which the opposition has been making more capital on than Labor, teenage crime. National is rightly going to make an issue of that. I believe the new Labor government will fail dismally if they don't make a big issue of it as well and beat them. And I note that Chris Hipkins, in one of the studies he did in his university studies, was to become an expert on crime. I can't remember the aspect of crime, but he has professional skills in this department. I hope he will use them. And lastly, I'd say the COVID crisis is not over. Many people are getting bored by it now, but hundreds of people are still dying because of it, and new mutations are likely to come our way. I note that in this church here, we have people who are not scared of COVID and they're not wearing masks. I'm still scared enough to do it. And I think we still need to be careful, and it shouldn't turn the issue off completely. Well, that's my wish list. I hope you will have a wish list that you could say these are my top priorities. My third question is, how would you rate Chris Hipkins as a potential Prime Minister? What do you see as his strengths and weaknesses? I have got some personal experience of this because I've been lobbying with all politicians, all political parties in the last 12 years about religion in schools, and some of them were very unfriendly and some were very friendly. And Chris Hipkins is one of the friendliest. This was about 6 years ago. He had not long been in this issue, and I said, could I come and have a talk with you sometime next time you're in Auckland? He said yes, and it was only about a week or two later, and he spent a half an hour with me in the cafe in K Road, and I could say whatever I liked. He didn't hurry me. He was a very good listener, and 2 or 3 other times I've written letters to him complaining about something or other, and he has every time has replied promptly and seriously, and he's taken my comments seriously. I'm sure has already done that. Another thing which not many people noticed was when the Education and Training Bill came in 2 years ago, the final reading of it, we went to the middle of the night, and because I was so interested in the clauses that dealt with religion in schools, I sat through to the bitter end. And Chris Hipkins was chairing this meeting, and he spent about 5 minutes of his speech praising who's the former Labour member of national member for Auckland, Nikki Kay. He spent a large amount of his time praising an opposition member and saying what a great job she's done as national spokesperson. And I could hardly believe my eyes. He just went on and said she's sure she'll do something, do well, whatever she goes to. The occasion of this was that she had just been caught up in national leadership struggles and had given up politics. And I felt it was a great loss. I invited Nikki to speak here. That's what I thought of her. No, not everybody agreed with me doing that. But the fact that there are such politicians as Chris Hipkins who can praise the opposition, and in the same Hilda article I referred to, Nikki Kay is giving praise for Hipkins. So there are two people from opposite parties who have the highest regard for each other. I think that's a very good role model, and that's a plus in Chris Hipkins' side. But on another aspect, which I've also had experience of, I was disappointed that Chris Hipkins decided to, 3 years ago, he announced that he wanted a discussion to take place with the idea of stopping Bible in schools, exclusively Christian classes in state schools, and replacing them with schools about other religions. Those of you who've been here regularly will know that issue. But he dropped that. The report on this change in schools came out 2 months ago, and the idea of getting rid of biased Christian education was still there. So you can understand it. It's not a popular issue. He doesn't want to raise so many issues. Every politician has to drop some. But I felt let down, and I felt that he is a little too eager at sometimes to please the majority, and sometimes, and I think the same applies to Jacinda. I think they tend to be opportunistic, and I was disappointed. But that's one negative in what's largely a positive views I have about him. My fourth question: if Hipkins becomes Prime Minister, well, it's no longer an if now; it's a will do. Will it improve Labour's chances at the election? And I think it will. The national leader has said it's just going to be the same fight over it again. But Jacinda was running out of steam, and Hipkins is in his prime. So I think he'll be very. I mean, he has a perfect opportunity to improve her weak spots, to emphasise the good parts of what was successful. He will have to be pretty dumb not to seize an opportunity and gain some, and he's no way has he done. So I think he will. But that's not to say I think Labour will necessarily win, but I think he will be a big positive. And it was also a positive that the Labour Party managed to change its leaders without any blood on the carpet, whatever. When you look at the National Party over the last couple of years, I think they've been through about 4 or 5 different spokespersons, and the Labour Party has changed the leaders twice over that period, and both were completely bloodless. Andrew Little resigned, and Jacinda stepped in 5 years ago, and now they've done another swap with so little blood on the carpet, we don't actually know what their discussion was at all. So I would say that he is likely to improve things. Whether he'll improve it enough is another question. And the other question is, the only question I can think of apart from that is, who should Labour pick as Deputy Prime Minister? And when I first heard the list of potential candidates, I thought Kerry Allen seemed to have some obvious advantages. She is a woman, she's a Maori, she is still a reasonable amount of experience. But I myself still thought I would have preferred Grant Robertson as my pick for deputy. But as the Herald said, it would be bad to have two male politicians from Wellington in the top team. And I noticed that last night, One News and News Hub were both suggesting Carmel Sepuloni. And I couldn't figure out, I knew she had some Polynesian blood in her, but I wasn't sure what kind of. And looking up, I see that she is partly Samoan, partly Tongan, and partly New Zealand European. And she lives in Auckland. So I can see her being elected, though I don't know enough about her to say whether she's going to be good or not. So the Labour caucus is expecting to be wrestling with these issues in about an hour's time, or about 2 hours' time. So in the meantime, to me, the big issue is what do Auckland Unitarians think? I'd appreciate your ideas on these subjects and any others that you would like to bring up. And for a hymn, I've got one that puts the finger on us. The Herald has put the finger on us for screwing things up for Jacinda. Are we going to be supportive of politicians who deserve it? Are we going to play our part in making things happen? And that's what the theme was of our next song. It's better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. And that's on mine. Thanks when you're ready. I invite you to join with me in the words for Extinguishing the Chalice. We extinguish this flame, the light of truth, the fire of commitment. In our hearts, together.